Welcome. This is Jasper from Amsterdam Vintage Watches, and today I'm ready finally to elaborate on this exhaustive story regarding a Rolex Milgauss 6541. It has everything. It has drama, it has emotion, it has a 100k loss to a potential 2.3 million in profit. Get ready. When I was still a little KOV, I always dreamt of one watch, being the 6541 Rolex Milgauss. This is such an elusive model that very little information was out there, and obviously very few owners of this example. Only approximately 100 watches have been made by Rolex for a specific niche. It was created for the scientific field, and not many were produced, also because of lack of popularity. Now, I always wanted to own this watch. Obviously, Rolex steel sports watches and the vintage counterparts were already very sought after, and my journey towards owning a Milgauss started as early as 2015. Obviously, I knew I wasn't able to finance one yet, because back then even the prices were over 150,000 euros. But I came very close to owning a genuine example in 2018, when I found a watch on Chrono24. Yes, this already sounds very stupid, but I decided to pull the trigger due to many factors. One being, I just suffered a massive loss as I was on holiday and my house got broken into, and back then I was ignorant enough to take some watches to the house and leave them there without any security or anything. And when I was on holiday, I came back to a very traumatizing experience. My watch is being stolen, and I want to recoup some losses. So I went for this deal that seemed too good to be true, because that's how they get you. The watch was priced, I believe, around 120,000 euros, and obviously I was I had healthy skepticism about this offering, but the offering came from one of the sales or previous sales managers from Chrono24. Furthermore, he had a physical store in Germany, and most importantly, the watch had an official Rolex service report, so it was just serviced by Rolex. And I decided to pull the trigger and acquire this watch, since I was looking for it for already 4 or 5 years. Now, I paid a price that is indeed too good to be true, and upon arrival, indeed, it was a disaster. Prior to making the transaction, obviously I did a little bit of due diligence, but as said, there's not so much information out there, and this is usually only shared among high-ranking connoisseurs and collectors, of which I only knew one. And I requested him to take a look at the watch, and by pictures it looked all fine. It ended up not being fine when I had the watch in my hand. I quickly discovered an eerie feeling about it. Things doesn't seem right, even though I never had this specific watch in my hand. Some things just didn't add up regarding the production process of how usually these waffle dials are created. And secondly, about the condition of the watch it was in. And I requested the only other person I knew who had a 6541 to pass by the store and examine them side by sides. And I came to the conclusion that this watch was indeed not an original 6541, albeit being serviced by Rolex as an original one and having some original parts, including the movement. Obviously, the value of this watch, being 120 to 200,000 euros back in the days, lies in the originality and the complete original configuration that this specimen lacked. So I was in more trouble than I could believe after the robbery. I also suffered a huge loss here that finally, after 3 years of litigation, I kind of covered. I tried to hedge as many losses as possible. I didn't make up for everything, obviously, but this only drove me towards more ambition for owning a true 6541. And Many people believed I succeeded my journey in 2019 when Philips sold a spectacular 6541. And if you've ever been to the auction, you can see if people are bidding online. You can see on the screen, and furthermore you can see on their online platform where the bid is coming from. So you can see a generic number or a generated number from the bidder, and secondly from what country it's being bid. And you can see on the screen the winning bidder was from the Netherlands. So people instantly started calling me like, congratulations Jasper, you've been looking so long for this watch and I know your story and I'm very happy you acquired this one because it's a beautiful example. That was the consensus. Unfortunately, I was not the buyer, and even worse, I did not know who acquired it, even though I thought I knew most people interested in 6541, especially in the Netherlands. But I found out half a year or so later when there was a gentleman in the store who I shared some very beautiful conversations with regarding vintage Patek Philippe's. He was a big collector of Patek Philippe, a Dutch gentleman who also shared the common interest in wines. So we had quite some wines, quite some beautiful stories, and after an hour and a half talking about Patek Philippe, I asked him, don't you like Rolex? And he says, well, it's not really my cup of tea. I prefer to stick with these complicated models. However, I do own one Rolex. I asked him which watch. A 6541. Back then, I couldn't tie the ends together yet, but he promised me that when he came back to Amsterdam, he would bring the 6541 for me to look at, because I told him I wanted to own one for so many years. A couple months passed by, and he comes to our store to look at a 3700J that we had on offer with a diamond bezel. And as he's looking at the watch, he grabs from his inside pocket the 6541 that he promised to bring on his next trip. And I was bewildered by it. I knew instantly it was this watch from the auction, and I told him the story, and my colleague Ramon was helping him to acquire the 3700. And at a certain point he said, I've never sold a watch in my life, but I don't have this feeling that you have with Rolex. And I can just see how happy you are with this watch, so I'm ready to sell it to you. Which was a dream come true. However, I didn't have the funds, so I told him immediately, thank you so much, but the 300,000 euros or so that is required to obtain this watch is not in my possession. He said, it's no problem, I'll take this 3700 of your hands, and I'll take that 3800, and give me those 3 Rolexes because I'll give them to nieces and cousins and whatever. And if you add some extra money on top, the watch is yours. And within 10 minutes I made the then biggest deal of my life and finally got my 6541 and celebrated like hell that evening. But that's a whole other story which I can't, unfortunately, at least I can't show the images. Perhaps one day I'll tell you about the party that followed. Yet I finally owned the 6541, being in absolutely pristine condition, and I thought I would be so happy about it, which I was. I was briefly very proud to finally obtain this watch after the struggles I've had getting this 6541. But since the condition was so good, I barely wore it. I couldn't really enjoy it, and I didn't feel like I deserved the watch. I deserved to wear this watch that was maintained in condition, originality and quality for all these decades. And then here I am at 26 years old, young fella trying to pull off this watch. It didn't make sense, so I scarcely wore it, but I did make a video about it in Dutch back then, just as I'm doing now, but then in English during COVID, walking around the canals, and it went kind of viral at a couple 100,000 views. And one of the viewers was a Belgian kid, similar age, who reached out, who said, I have a 6541 myself. I saw your video. I didn't know anything about this watch, but I follow you, and I believe this watch is the same. So I invited him to come over, and he came over. He told me the story about how his grandfather, his late grandfather, left it to him, and some family of his were fighting over his belongings, and he said, I just want one thing to remember him by. And he ended up getting this watch that was in bits and pieces by then. It was still in proper condition, but it was just all fallen out of each other. The parts were all falling out and everything. And he came with like this plastic bag, opening this plastic bag, and there it was. And I immediately fell in love. We made a deal. I also gave him a day date additionally to reminisce his late grandfather with it, because of course he felt sorry selling this watch. But when I told him about the value of the watch, it was hard for him to keep this piece. And he actually, I'm still in contact with him. He actually used it to set up his business like he used the funds properly. But additionally, he still has a Rolex to reminisce his father with. And I enjoyed this watch so much, and I still have it on my wrist, and it still brings me a lot of joy. It's beat up, it's not perfect, just like I'm not perfect, but it's very enjoyable to wear. And it kind of obscured the joy I felt for the 6541 almost new old stock that I had that was sold by Philips. So I decided to let that one go because we had a client, a very dear client and friend, who really wanted to obtain this watch. We sold it to him, fetched $500,000. By that time it was a very reasonable price, but again, this watch is a very specific and perfect condition 6541. Everybody's happy, so it seems, until the auction comes around and Philips is selling again a 6541 that people presumed was mine because it was in similar condition. I was in the auction room with my client who purchased mine for 500,000 euros, and that watch went under the hammer for 2.3 million. So again, a lot of people thought it was my watch. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I didn't fetch 2.3 million. My client still has the 6541, the new old stock one. He's very happy with it, and I'm still very happy with this 6541. And that's the story about this reference.